I'm Aaron Ford, and I'm your Attorney General. I want to start off by telling those honoring George Floyd through their protests that I see you. The issues brought to light by Mr. Floyd's killing are not new, but they've remained unseen by many for way too long. So I say again, I see you. As Nevada's top law enforcement officer, I have a sworn duty to be the voice of justice. That's why, under my administration, our unofficial motto at the Attorney General's office is, "Our job is justice." But before I was ever elected by you to this position, I was an African American. And after I leave this position, I will be an African American. It's who I am. And that's why it means I also have a duty to speak about the unique intersection that I occupy as a black law enforcement official. As Attorney General, I frequently frame community relationships with law enforcement as falling into one of three types of communities. The first community is one where there is near absolute trust in law enforcement, and a belief that if law enforcement says it's so, then it's the absolute truth. But we can always do better. So for these communities, law enforcement must work to augment that trust. Then there is a second community of people where trust once existed, but its relationship with law enforcement has been damaged in some way, possibly because of an adverse experience or vicarious experiences. There's still some sense of good in the law enforcement, but there's still a seed of distrust that can germinate if it's not addressed. In these communities, law enforcement must take proactive efforts to work to restore trust. But in the last community, there's virtually no trust or faith in law enforcement. Those communities view law enforcement as an enemy that has no real interest in them and cannot be trusted. Here, law enforcement must work to build a trust that has never existed. Frankly, the neighborhoods in which I grew up fell into the third category. There are people who did not welcome the sight of police vehicles as they patrolled our communities. So although there were times I personally welcomed the sight of police as I was running from a bully, I understand the sentiment of those who did not have the same reaction I did. Distrust in law enforcement continues to grow from incidents that gained the national spotlight over the past few years. The victims of these incidents are recognizable to you: George Floyd, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, Tamir Rice, and Eric Gardner, for example. But for each example that has made national profiles, there are others that have never made the news. Those families and communities remain unseen and they grieve alone. And those communities feel invisible and voiceless. Many of these protesters in our streets are in fact from these types of communities. The law enforcement response to George Floyd's killing is notable because this time sheriffs, chiefs, and other law enforcement leaders have openly and vocally denounced the officers who were involved in Mr. Floyd's death. Here in Nevada, my colleagues, Sheriff Lombardo, Balaam, and former Reno City Chief of Police Soto, have spoken out against these actions. Nevadans have an absolute and unequivocal right to protest, but that right to protest does not extend to a right to commit acts of violence. Despite my protest and my support of these protests, I cannot condone violence against police officers or property. I started these remarks by letting you know that I see you, but I also hear you, and yes, I'm listening. And I want to amplify your voice by speaking out as your Attorney General and top law enforcement officer in Nevada. I've already spoken to our governor, some of our legislators, and several of my fellow law enforcement officers, and we want to give you the opportunity to have meaningful conversations to augment, restore, and create your trust in law enforcement. As a first step to doing so, tomorrow I will be holding a virtual town hall with several other law enforcement officials, as well as community leaders, to give you the opportunity to directly speak with us. I will post additional details on that virtual town hall shortly. In the meantime, I will ask everyone to protest in a manner that does not endanger our neighbors and our fellow Nevadans, including those who may be wearing a uniform today. I likewise ask and proactively thank my law enforcement colleagues for their professionalism and patience as their neighbors grieve and express their fear and anger. In closing, I want to again take this opportunity to extend my condolences to George Floyd's family and loved ones, and to everyone else who has lost loved ones to police misconduct and violence. I reiterate my commitment to all Nevadans that as your Attorney General, my job will continue to be justice.